Very interesting. Thank you. Thank you very much. We are now moving to the Q&A session. Thank you to all our panelists for such an engaging and exciting presentations. We apologize for some of the technical difficulties early on. If some of you do want to see the videos again, please do let us know. So we know that context is sort of a hazy, nebulous term, right? But I'm still going to be using it, right? Especially since it's in the title of our session. So here we saw quite a few interesting presentations and uses of context, right? We saw context as a cue to jog one's memory. In Revive, we saw context to help predict a behavior or outcome, like in CityGuard or the context-aware paper. We also saw using context to teach people vocabura, or to help people in hard of hearing that are deaf or hard of hearing. We also have seen sort of context being used to cluster people into personas or phenotypes. And so what's interesting here is, I have one question that I'd like to, all of you, or as many of you, to address. In many of the papers presented today, the relationship between the context and what is being detected or predicted sort of matters, right? Really matters, right? And so many times we end up throwing the kitchen sink when it comes to sensing context. We do not know the relationships. And so how do we go about these relationships between context and what you're actually detecting or predicting, or what you're using the context for? And so my question is, how do you go about deciding what context or what contextual factor or environmental factor to sense for your specific application? And this is sort of a general question, because a lot of times we're thinking, let's try to grab everything and anything we can, and then hopefully something's going to stick. And so what are your thoughts about that? And do you have sort of a framework to go about addressing what context to select?
Yeah, I mean, I can start. So yeah, I am the lead author, like in Revive. So can you guys hear me?
I can hear you well. Thanks, Matt.
Yeah. Thank you, Nabil. Like, so the process like that we followed for context, like we can say like how we came up with that decision. So the way like we used context, it's like more of like a theory kind of driven way. Like, so we went to like the cued memory recall kind of literature, and we found that like people are talking about like what kind of context can actually help people to recall. And we went to that like literature and saw like what are the different kind of context people are using. So there are like around conversation, location, but it's very vague. Like what we have found, like if you look at the theory, like they're talk about stuff very abstractly, not like very concrete way. So what we did is like, it's mostly like a translation process, like, okay, what kind of context we can feasibly capture and can match with the theory, like it will not be perfect. And there is like always this user-centered kind of process, like the constraints on battery, like there are a lot of stuff going on. So it's kind of like what the theory kind of says, what's the feasibly what we can capture, and the constraint of like what is like in like the way we are capturing it. I mean, constant in the real environment, like when we are like dropping it like in the real world. So these three elements like kind of decides. Obviously, like, I mean, we can throw like a lot of stuff. I think like that's like more like on the exploratory side of stuff. Like if someone is interested into like that kind of work.
So basically, to summarize, you sort of go to the theory, you find these relationships, and then see what you can reliably sense or detect to a certain degree, and then maybe potentially add a few other exploratory contextual factors to sense as well.
The priority is kind of like, we'll go like, I'm sorry. Yeah.
Move the field forward. No, that's a
yeah. So it's like always like kind of like what we can already know and reliably use, because we also have like less time to implement them, right? So the theory kind of gives us some idea like which could be the good sensors or context to start with. And definitely, like as a UbiComp field, like we want to know like what kind of contexts are useful like in exploratory sense. So that's like almost not like kind of like a secondary aim, like at least in my research, I can say. But we definitely capture and try to see like what kind of like context is useful in what situation.
Great, thank you, Mesh. Any other authors would like to add to that?
Hey, so I just wanted to add something to what Ashviki had already said. Even in our work, we mostly looked at the organizational psychology domain and saw what they've already said about which sort of activities could matter. But I think another thing that really motivated our feature selection and context selection specifically was what would be the applications or the implications of our work. So we wanted to stick to contexts which people in organizations and personal management can actually change so that workers can improve, as opposed to other contexts which aren't really in their control. So that way, that actually gives opportunity for looking at interventions or testing new hypotheses, and I think that can also help drive what you're deciding, especially in that exploratory sort of phase that Mashwiki was mentioning.
Thank you, Vedant. Yeah, and I love how you use sort of these organizational personas and unsupervised clustering to be able to understand, to sort of link that with job performance. And I thought that was also interesting, thinking about, you mentioned in your discussion as well, how to alter and adapt context to sort of support occupational performance. So not only using sort of the context to learn from it, right? Or to trigger cues or to be able to use it for prediction, but can we actually also think about how to change the context as well to get people to result in sort of positive or good behaviors, right? All right. Anyone else would like to add?
One thing I wanted to say about my bias in my way of thinking. Okay. So what I think that there are different ways like context is kind of like thought about, like the social scientists think context like in one way. And this is like more ethnographic and very thick description kind of thing. The statisticians think like it's very high dimensional something. And the memory literature people like also thinks in the same way. But I'm coming from a more behavioral science kind of perspective, like where like the theory kind of dictates like what kind of context like we can capture. But again, behavioral science is like very much controlled experiments and they don't have a lot of context ideas. So it's a pretty like interesting field to really explore, I think, from different perspectives.
Definitely. All right, I'm going to I have one more question before I go to general questions. So many of you used non-wearable data, some used smartphone data, some of you used sort of a combined sensing approach. For those of you that used wearable data, what were the challenges you faced to capture the context? And for those that did not use wearables, are there wearables that could have helped your objective in capturing context? And feel free to unmute and go for it. I think a lot of times when we're thinking about scaling our studies, right, we're thinking, and longitudinally, we're thinking about sort of smartphone data and other sensing modalities that we know people adhere to using. But someone unmuted?
Can you hear me?
Yes, Keandru, go ahead.
Yeah. Yeah, maybe I'm muted before. And I think the analysis is the first thing for the available data, because our data is full of noisy and something outliers. So I think the first thing is to pre-process the data and analyze the correlation between the target things and our data. As we mentioned in our paper, in urban cities, there may be some internal and external and some immediately factors and delay factors. I think we can find some indicators from the data to analyze where our targets will going. So I think the analysis is the first thing to the available data. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Kyun-Ru. Anyone else? We have a nice question that sort of applies to everyone here. One second. So here, a general question: how can we use these ubiquitous technologies and the context that you're sensing, and also the application that you're working on to help in the current pandemic? But also, how do you adapt them, right? In sort of does the current COVID pandemic also impact how one would use your system or technology?
So yeah, I think I can go ahead because we recently also presented some stuff related to like the future of work and how ubiquitous and social technologies can sort of feed into this current paradigm. And I think firstly, I guess there's like a trade-off because ubiquitous technologies kind of give you access to a lot of people unobtrusively. It can scale, and in theory, you can a lot of the context which all of us mentioned in our papers, you could still keep measuring them, even in that socially distant sort of form. But what you're measuring is going to change. So, for example, location context might not really give you enough data anymore because people aren't moving as much. Same goes with things like physical activity or specifically more social sensors. I think we have Bluetooth, and the last talk also was talking about BLE. So those methodologies will kind of go away, but instead I think we can start looking for traces in other forms of digital technology. So that could be how are people, we had some talks about phone use and app usage. How does that translate to just web conferencing, right? Can you detect fatigue from web conferencing? Or can you see how the frequency of phone use has changed because now you've got people connected and collaborating all over the globe? So I think those are things that UbiComp sort of allows. That's the opportunity it gives. But like I said, the trade-off is how much are we like getting into people's lives now, because everybody's sort of away and it's all blended together now.
Very, very, very good point. Very good point. Anyone else would like to add to that?
Yeah. I think the individual aspect is very important, but I think in our predict or recognize a problem, we also need to find some shared knowledge, like many individuals have some similar patterns or some similar indicators, or they can help each other to complementary the information. So I think the shared information is also the important context, yeah, for the prediction or recognize the problem. Yeah.
Thank you, Kyun-Ru. Thank you for that addition. Anyone else would like to comment?
Yeah, I mean, one thing that's like really interesting, like what this like COVID-19 basically exposed, like some of the social problems, for example, like the death threats, like for example, in the African American community is very high, like in the US, like, and some of the hypothesis here is that they're more stressed out or like probably like hit by the poverty more. I think one of the interesting thing like going forward could be like, how can we use this like sensing technologies or like self-reporting so that we can get like more and more data every day, and we can really like intervene and improve and um, work on more preventative kind of intervention. So one of the areas that we are looking at is Flint, Michigan, where we have a lot of African American kids with they're from fairly low socioeconomic status. So we are trying to use this sensor and self-reporting together and trying to see that why they use substances and stuff. So and the goal here is not only to sense but to intervene in the longer term.
Very interesting. Yeah, no, definitely providing sort of new, almost seems like new challenges, but as well with every challenge comes sort of new opportunities for us to be able to send information,
Basically,
possibly improve our prediction and our ability to make our systems smarter, right? So,
and the phones or other stuff are fairly not like iPhones and things. So you're in a very constrained kind of environment. So it kind of the research priorities and other things also change.
makes sense. Makes sense.
One thing I would also like to add is that so people were talking about the economically privileged and economically backward studies. I work in accessible technology a lot. So I work with people with disabilities, and we've done a recent paper. We found out that people with disabilities are affected a lot due to the pandemic because because we're resorting to all sort of assistive technology. Like I personally am hard of hearing, and I use captioning a lot, and having a remote caption option is just not the same as sort of having an in-person interpreter or stuff like that. So those are the kind of challenges that people with disabilities will face due to the pandemic, the communication challenges, navigation challenges, and stuff like that. But as people were talking about, it also opens new opportunities because it gives us an opportunity to study how people with disabilities actually resort to remote collaboration methods. Like for me, for example, I'm hard of hearing and I use captioning, and I'm using remote captioning right now. And I booked captioning for the UbiComp session, and it was a really interesting experience on how a remote captioner who's sitting at a different place of the world is actually listening to a conversation right now and captioning our conversation, which I don't see it on a different computer screen. So it's really interesting to study how this opportunity actually happens.
Thank you, Dhruv, for that. That's definitely so interesting. Where you're having to sort of relearn, right, certain skills, right, to become a little bit more comfortable in this new world and this new environment. And I also want to thank UbiComp as well, and Jennifer Rode, I believe, who's our accessibility chair, for making sure that we have the additional captioning as well added to these sessions to try to help. We realize this isn't sort of the optimal approach, but again, gives us new opportunities to learn, right, and to advance our technology in the future.
I'd just like to add one more thing. If people are interested in how the closed caption works, there is this CC button at the bottom of the Zoom screen. You can use that to turn on the caption. It's basically an external person who's actually joining a conversation right now on his captioning. So you can see how it actually works. That's what I'm using right now for understanding the presentation. Yeah.
That's amazing. Yes, the closed caption button at the bottom gives you a few options as well to select from. I'm going to, anyone else would like to add to sort of the utility of your algorithm in our, or your system in our current approach, in our current times? I'm going to also open it up now. We have a few more minutes left. I want to open it up to questions. So you can raise your hand and then we will directly unmute you to be able to ask your question. All right, so we have Flora here. Before I go to Flora, just want to say also, I have one more reminder here. I want to make sure to remind everyone to continue discussion in GatherTown. I'm going to show you a screen. We have a session there for, I believe our session is session 2C. We have a table there where you can enter, and then authors will go to the author section, and then the audience goes to the audience section, and you can also interact there as well. So I just want to make sure I mention that this discussion continues as well there. So Flora, let's unmute Flora.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you now, Flora. Go ahead.
Okay, great. Since the title of the session is about context, so I'm just in closing, I guess I would like to ask everybody to mention in a couple words, if you have to strip off all sensing, I mean, this is a question I posted anyway in session Q&A. If you have to strip off all sensing and input modalities in your project to those that are absolutely essential, what are the non-negotiable context signals that you absolutely cannot drop out of your project?
Thank you, Flora. Great question. Let's just go around. Who hasn't spoken? All right.
All right. So, yeah, from me, yeah, I'm Ari, the lead author in the vocabulary paper. So, yeah, this is a difficult, question to answer from our perspective, because we only use the GPS location to detect the contextual information. So, if we strip the GPS signal away, like we can't really use our tool at all. So, I hope this answers your question.
Brilliant, thanks.
Yes. Thinking about technology and backups, we needed a backup SV and then a backup for our backup SV. So we can probably think the same as well in the future for context. If one modality fails, do we have a backup for our inference? But yeah, thanks Ari for that. Who's next?
So if I can add, yeah, we do realize the limitations of our process, well, like using only the GPS. So in future works, like we're trying to use like cameras and more, let's say, technology that's maybe not as accurate as what we're using right now to detect like locations and like along a route. Like using a camera just to, see like what the user is passing by. But, at this point, like we're just, keeping it at the minimum. And if the GPS network goes down, like we are really screwed.
Got it. Next, I'm just going to select randomly. Yali, personalized context-aware collaborative online activity. What are your thoughts? What do you so think of this as like a fire session. If you were to, what was the most important sensing modality that you used to be able to create your prediction? And obviously more information can be obtained from your paper. Do we have Yali here?
Yes. Hello.
Hello. Go ahead, Yali.
Oh, yes. I want to say that in our paper, the online activity actually is very popular in our society. So I think if with the accurate prediction, we can know that what apps a user will use next time and in a new location. So for mobile operators, and I think they can they can make specific plans for their users to subscribe their own plan to make the best use of the online service, and it can also satisfy the users' preferences and interests.
Got it. Thank you so much, Yali. Munmun and Vedant, are you guys there, our organizational personas? Your thoughts?
Yes. So our data set comes from the TestRay project, and like we've got like a bunch of sensors on it. But if I were to just like pick one say device, so to say, I would like looking at our results. It's just the smartphone itself, like unlock activities and GPS. That seems to be giving us the best, like the most prominent features on the clustering part of it. But I do think some of it is like one artifact of that is how compliant people are with different devices, because smartphones, everybody had those. So we just gave them an application that does the sensing, but wearables we had to give them, which were not their actual devices. So if they're not charging it, we don't get enough data. Things like that also come into play of like, what is the user compliance and things like that. Munmun, is there anything you want to add?
Yeah, I really like this question because I often find myself asking, what is sort of what would be a parsimonious approach to sensing? I mean, of course, we can use the kitchen sink and collect as much data as possible with as many sensors, but obviously there are some trade-offs, right? Trade-offs include things like burden on the participants, especially if you're giving them a new device that might be intrusive to their lives. There are concerns about privacy and security as well, and a number of other concerns. So I think, it really boils down to, independent of the particular project, it boils down to what population it is and what is the sensing stream that is likely to minimize the burden. That would depend on the behaviors of these individuals, the lifestyles they have, and so forth. And also thinking about what is sort of the, what sort of gain can we have by reducing that burden. So there is probably some thinking to do around, can I, deploy a sensor which may not give me the most accurate data, or data that will cover all of the attributes that I'm interested in, but maybe it is more suitable for a more longitudinal study because it is gonna put less burden on the individual. So depending on the population, depending on the problem, I guess we have to make an educated guess on what sensing stream might work the best.
Really great point, Munmun. It sort of reminds me about how, when we're currently thinking about diagnostics or short-term studies, we can really sort of oversense and we might incentivize people to adhere to our technology and our sensing modalities. But once we move to sort of more longitudinal studies, then it sort of we start to shift our thinking into what's the device or sensor that is reliable, right? And people will definitely adhere to using throughout their daily lives. Thank you for that. Very great response. Anyone else? I know we're over time, so but anyone else would like to add to answer that question? I want to encourage everyone again to go to GatherTown and make sure, and I'll show you sort of a screenshot here. Let me just share my screen really quickly. Okay, so here, this is sort of our podium. but you should be able to find this for every track session. Authors can stand here, and then the audience can stand here and also interact and ask questions. So I want to thank the speakers for a great session. Thank you to all our assistants, Mohit, Yuran, Pradika, and Jessica, for being there and helping us. And also, I want to encourage everyone to go to that room to continue the discussion. Thank you, everyone, again. Appreciate it. Have a great day and rest of the conference. Bye-bye.